Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And this is why you should stop buying new games based on my reviews. Or anyone's reviews for that matter. It's not exclusive to me, but it's the general idea that I talk about a lot of new things on the channel. I talk a lot about new games. I'm showing you the newest Kickstarters, and that is the nature of what happens here. It's the nature of running a YouTube channel around board games. At the end of the day, I can talk about some of my favorite games like Le Havre or Cyclades or whatever until today, from today until tomorrow. But it doesn't have the same level of interest. People aren't quite as interested in the older things. That you can find the older things in the older videos. The new stuff is what I will, practically speaking, talk about. But it doesn't mean that you should necessarily act on it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't either. It really depends on what you want to do. You see, I recently did a video on the channel about why I believe you should rotate your games and why I believe you should get rid of your games. And before being a content creator, I used to also not get newer games. I used to wait and see. Now that I do videos, now that I do content, I end up playing a lot of mediocre games in the effort of trying out the new things. Hundreds of games come out every single year. Hundreds of games. You cannot, practically speaking, you simply cannot keep up. Unless you're like literally one person I know of, you cannot keep up with all the new games. And even that one person can't keep up with all the new games. But nonetheless, I mean, 2020, if you filter on Board Game Geek, if you go to an advanced search and you look for games in 2020 and you exclude expansions, we're just talking about base games, nothing else, there are 4,800 games that were added to the Board Game Geek lists in 2020. 4,800 games with the 2020 tag for the year. That's an obscene amount of games. You could play 15 new games a day, 13 new games a day, I don't know the exact math. 13 new games a day, every single day for the entire year, and you would still not cover all 4,800. Now, to be fair, I'm cheating. Let's ignore all the stuff and focus only on things worth paying attention to. If you filter down those 4,800 games to games that have a 6.8 rating or higher, and at least 100 ratings, meaning it's not, Aunt Sally who decided to give your game a 10. So basically, you have at least 100 ratings, and you have a 6.8 or higher. That rating brings you to 400. That filter criteria brings you down to 428 games left. Now, 428 games is reasonable. Now you only have to play a game and a half a day to keep up with all the new stuff, which again is obscene. Most people cannot, practically speaking, do that. For most people, that is never going to happen. That's a 6.8 or above. That's not a bad conversation. Now, to be fair, those 428 games, once you filter out things like deluxifications, or not really things that are expansions, but things that aren't new, you're closer to 375 to 400 games or so. Again, now it's just practically reasonable. Now you have to play like a game a day on average, and you'll have played most of them. You have a few left to go through. It's not reasonable for most people. You simply cannot play all the games, and this video is about the reasons, the filters, the things you should be doing to not even bother trying to put yourself through that. There are too many games, there's not enough time. These are good problems to have. But it does mean that if your goal literally is just try all the games, if that's your objective, if that's your goal, go ahead. By all means, buy all the games, get whatever you want, do what you need to do. But if your goal, in any way, is to actually try to restrain what you're purchasing, to simultaneously allow yourself to get new games, because I'm a fan of getting new games. I always did get new games. It's a question of how many new games. How many games do I back on Kickstarter? How many games do I wait until there's some sort of general acceptance that this game is good? I think filters are a big part of that. This concept of 6.8 on Board Game Geek. And by the way, if you take it a step further, because honestly, 6.8 is fine. And 6.8 is an arbitrary number that I chose because I find that that's where anything under a 6.8 is where I just stop paying attention. For me to even look at a game under a 6.8, somebody I know has to be telling me how amazing it is and why the Board Game Geek rankings are off. Practically speaking, if I look at the games that stay in my collection, they tend to range from around a 6.8, 6.9 higher. I think I had one game that was lower than that in my collection. One game. And so if I do 6.8 or above, I'm filtering out basically everything that's relevant. Now, if you're willing to be a bit more cutthroat, and if you find yourself being pulled in by more games, then I think you should be more cutthroat. If you find yourself being pulled in and attracted by too many games to pay attention to, then start narrowing your filters. Start using more and more restrictive filters for any number of things until you get to the target number of games that you can reasonably actually deal with without feeling overwhelmed. For some people, this hobby is about exploring new things. For some people, the hobby is about finding the games you love and doing deep dives into those games. For some, it's a mixture of both. But for me, I like both. I love finding and discovering the newest, best thing. I love it. There are some incredible games out there. And then I love diving into the games that I have discovered. If the only point is this pursuit, if the only point is the chasing of the next thing, once you find it, what's the point? You just chase the next one? There has to be a degree, at least for me, this is my own personal goals, there has to be a degree of enjoying that thing that you are chasing, enjoying the thing that you are finding. It's not purely about the travel, it's about the destination, and so I have to actually play the games I love. For myself. Again, that's just me. So yeah, be more restricted with your filters. Try narrowing it down. If you narrow those 4,800 games, if you narrow your rating to a 7.5 and above. So again, 7.5 or above, minimum 100 ratings. Now you're down to a somewhat manageable 135 new games that came out. And that's a 7.5 or above, 100 ratings, and ignoring like things like deluxe editions of games, you're down to 135 games that came out in 2020. Not all those games will be for you. But at this point, we start moving into somewhat manageable territory. I say somewhat with a giant asterisk. For someone like myself who does get a lot of, I'm getting a lot of games on Kickstarter, I'm buying a lot of games myself, I'm getting games sent by publishers. But yeah, I can actually play 135 new games from 2020 once you apply those filters. Now, the practical reality is because I'm covering a lot of games for the channel, many of the games I'm covering will not make it to a 7.5 or above. Some will, many will, but many will not as well. So I actually end up playing a lot of mediocre or okay games at best. But yeah, down to 135 games so far. If you filter further, maybe your genre. Is your genre miniatures? Do you want to focus on miniature gaming as opposed to other things, or games with miniatures as opposed to just miniature gaming? Well, those 135 will be cut down to close to like 25. That's much more manageable. You want to apply a further filter, you don't try anything over $100, well those 25 or so get dropped down to around 13 or so. Anything that had over $100 as an entry point on Kickstarter, you're down to around 13 or so games. If you want to apply my personal interest of what art does and doesn't appeal to me, well now I'm down to around 6 games or so. If you start trying to apply filter after filter, reason after reason to say no to a game, it becomes easier and easier to both get the new stuff, to try the new stuff, to see what's for you, without actually being faced with 4,800 games to pay attention to. And those filters help. That price filter is very reasonable for many people. Many people, if you sit there and get a $200 game on Kickstarter, and you play it 4 times, that's $50 a play. Now granted, you could sell it, you could trade it, you can move on from it, but is it really worth it? Applying some sort of reasonable price point filter based on your understanding of how often you actually play the games in your collection. That's reasonable, by all accounts. Because again, the $200 game, if you sell it after 4 plays, you might be able to reduce your cost. But if you hold on to it because you're like, I like games and I keep games, if you hold on to it forever, that's 54 plays, $200, $50 a play. That's a lot of money. Not saying it's crazy, not saying it's not worth it, but applying any form of filters from ratings to price points to genre to personal interest of does the miniature, all those things, do they apply to you? They're very relevant decisions to try to filter down what you can actually pay attention to. And let games settle. This is a big deal in my opinion, and it's something I used to do. I wish I still could, but inherently it's that conflict of running a channel that talks about board games and reviewing all the new stuff. Inherently it's that conflict. But something I used to do before I had a YouTube channel is I used to back games on Kickstarter. That was fine. But then other than Kickstarter, I let games settle. I didn't get games that were new. I didn't get the current year's releases, or at least very, very rarely. I would get some Kickstarter games that I backed, and then everything else I would let breathe. Oh, congratulations, Ark Nova just came out and it's showing up in everyone's list and everyone's hyped about it. Let's see if that's still true a year later. Let's see if it's still true 2 years later. Because for some it is. Some games show up in the top 100 list and people are still talking about it, people are still excited about it. If you find Lost Ruins of Arnak, if you find Dune Imperium, the latest hotness from, a year and a half ago, people still care. They're still exciting, they're still being rated well. But there are many other games that stopped showing up in people's feeds. There are many other games that were exciting and new and fresh when they were available on Kickstarter, when they started showing up in people's feeds for the first time, and then a few months later, they're gone. It happens all the time. Some of my favorite games like Terraforming Mars, games like Blood Rage, like Everdell, like Inish, like Spirit Island, some of my favorite games in my collection are games that I intentionally sat there and watched them year after year for 2 years to see if they're still around. And I was like, fine, I'll pick up Terraforming Mars. People clearly like it. And I love it. And it's great and it's amazing. And you're like, well, Alex, if you could have picked that up earlier, you could have had it for 2 more years. Sure, but if I applied that logic, I would have picked up everything else that people were talking about 2 years earlier, and I would have ended up with a lot of games that I didn't need to get. You see, there's multiple reasons to let a game sit. There's multiple reasons to let a game just settle a bit over time and see if it's still for you. The first is the FOMO aspect. practically speaking, when it shows up all over the place and people are talking about it, everybody wants it. You want in. It's the same ridiculous craziness as to why we feel the need to go see movies in theaters right away, day one, as soon as we can. You don't really need to. You can choose not to, but there's that aspect of feeling like you're involved with everyone else. If you let that pass you by, if you let that moment of time just go past, give it 3 months, give it 5 months, 6 months for it to settle, you may find that game that you needed to pick up today so urgently and you didn't even end up playing it for another year and a half, which happens. People do that. People aggressively seek out overpriced copies of games because they're the only way to get your hands on it, and Ark Nova will sit on your shelf unplayed for a year and a half. It happens. It happens to all of us. Or, that's not necessarily true, it happens to a lot of us. And so it's something to be mindful of. And the second aspect is, it's not just an issue of FOMO, it's just sometimes people are hyped about things because they're new and they're fresh, and if you wait, you'll see the ratings start to come in. You'll see the 6s, the 7s, the average score slowly on Board Game Geek settling down to a 7.1, which might be good enough for you to still try it. Especially if it's a genre or a theme you like, or it might not be. The hype is present, and the hype shouldn't be a factor in your decision. Let things settle over time. And if you have a favorite reviewer you follow, if you love whoever, myself, Shut Up and Sit Down, Dice Tower, whatever it is, if you follow someone else and they're putting out a review of a game, and they love the game, wait, pause, breathe a bit. See if other channels like it too, or dislike it. See if other channels point out flaws that someone else missed or just didn't have. A single opinion is a single opinion. A single opinion could be under the influence of anything. Under the influence of personal taste, under the influence of just being a little more excited about things. You sit me down with a theme I like or a genre I like, I will be more excited. It will happen. And then there's other games that someone else will drool over and I'll be like, it was okay. I liked it, I didn't love it. You'll find both. You'll find games that some channels love and I don't love. You'll find games I love and other channels I'm middling on. And you just need to see for yourself whose taste do you align with, what other factors are there, do you care enough, or maybe there's too many games to try, so why don't you wait to find a game that both of us love. That's another factor. Apply filter after filter after filter. There are hundreds and hundreds of games that come out every single year, and you can't, practically speaking, play them all. It's just not feasible. Play the games you have. I did a video on this recently, the whole video of cycling games, of getting rid of rotating games from your collection. The idea of trying new things, of keeping others, of trying to see what fits for you. On a regular basis. I track my plays. And I evaluate what I haven't played in a year and why. And I go through that. I'm trying to see what's going on. Because for me, again, some of what I have is the factor of I'm covering games for the channel. And so I get them, I try them, I move on from them. Other times, I'm just as victim to this. I'm just as victim to the fact that I want all the shiny. I want all the new stuff. I want to back all the games on Kickstarter. But you can't, practically speaking, play everything you want. And so you have to make hard choices. You have to apply filter after filter after filter. I do a monthly series of what I backed on Kickstarter with my wife, and while I still back too many, part of that is always going through, here's all the stuff I wanted, and here are the reasons I cut this one out, I cut that one out, that one wasn't a good enough price, this one I wanted, but I have other games that feel similar, that one was compelling, but not compelling enough, and this one I want to see more reviews on because I just wasn't sold on. I find those filters, and I still back too much, and it still should be less. And I've talked about this in other videos as well, there are other tips and tricks you can apply from giving yourself budgets. Giving yourself a budget, a limited number of games. If you say to yourself, I can only pick up 4 or 5 games a year, or 2 games a month, or a game a month, whatever budget works for you in terms of number of games, in terms of cost of games, in terms of a rule of 1 in, 1 out, apply reasons and filters why you shouldn't get every single thing that shows your way. Because, I watch these top 10 lists at the end of the year, just like you do. And sure, there's many I've played, and those are easy because I know my opinion of the games I've played, but many I haven't. There are a ton of games that came out in 2021 I haven't played, and I sit there and I watch these top 10 lists, and I'm like, but I should get So Clover, and I should get Ark Nova, and I should get this, and I should get that. I look at all these games too, and I also walk away with a little mental buy list of all the games I want, even while I have games on my shelf that I haven't played through. I'm not saying don't get them. I'm saying let them sit. Let time run its course and see if it's still something that you want to pick up. The good games will be reprinted. The good games will continue to be talked about. They'll get next print runs. They'll get expansions. If you wait long enough, you'll find yourself picking up a copy of Everdell in the big box in the Kickstarter for a much better deal than anyone else who picked it up the entire way. And granted, they had Everdell the whole time. But I'm guessing you have some of your favorite games as well. Stop buying all the new stuff. Figure out your filter. Whatever it might be. Whether it's time, whether it's a minimum score, whether it's ratings, whether it's letting it sit. And if you find yourself, oh no, I lost out. Ark Nova is super expensive now. It's $200 on eBay. That's fine. Wait till the next print run. Something else will keep you busy until then. You do not need to rush. You do not need to be part of wave one. You do not need to buy into the hype. There'll be enough other people doing it that you don't need to join in. What's the takeaway of this? It really depends. Ultimately, do what you want. Again, at the end of the day, on this channel, I will still be covering new games. I cover old games. I talk about old stuff. I have my top blend list. I have all that. But yes, I will cover new games. I will talk about Kickstarters. I will still be talking about all the new stuff that I'm sitting here in this video telling you to not be pulled in by. And I mean it. You genuinely shouldn't. Find all the reasons to run screaming for the other direction. Unsubscribe from YouTube channels. Leave Facebook groups. Do what you need to do. You find yourself with so many games and so many interests you do not need to get it all. But obviously do what you want. This is only a video for those who find themselves frustrated by the new. Who find themselves frustrated by the fact there are so many games to pay attention to. Great games. Pay attention to older games. That's a big one, by the way. Sit there and go through not the top 10 of 2021, but sit there and go through other videos of the top 50 games of all time, the top 100 games of all time. Before you play, Board Game Ramblings, Dice Tower, myself, any number of channels have sat there and done lists of their favorite games ever. Tons of channels. Find those. Find videos that aren't restricted to this past year. And those are games that you can find a lot more information on. If you want to see a Spirit Islands a game for you, there's a ton of information. Marvel Champions, Le Havre, those are games that are sitting around with a lot more information. Pick the hot games that at least have stood the test of time and aren't something new that no one will care about in a year and a half. Except for mine, MGT, by the way. This game is freaking fantastic and you should get it. But ignore what I'm saying, despite my hype, and wait. It will be around if it's good enough. You'll be able to get your hands on it. Use filters. Wait until games settle. Stop buying new games just because they're new. You don't need to see a movie the day it comes out. You don't need to get the latest technology the second it's released. You can wait until it's the third generation Apple iPod, whatever it is. You can wait. Apple what's the headphones called? iPod? No. What are the headphones called? Why am I blanking on this? Earpods. You can wait until whatever third generation of technology. You can wait until the movie comes out. You can wait until the game has been around for 2 or 3 years. You do not need to pick it up day one. I'll still be talking with them. I still love this hobby. I just find that there are many people who find themselves overwhelmed by the hype. I see it in the comments on newer videos. I see it in the conversations about things. I guarantee you, if you want to take a look at the videos I've done over the past year, the reviews I've done, the amount of games, a 3 is still my most common rating. The 3s and 3.5s are still the most common rating I give on the channel. Every single one of those is a game that, some of them I keep, some of them I like, but every single one of them is a game you do not need to pick up. It's just saying, it's practically speaking. Maybe it'll be a 4 or 5 for you, but for me, it's a game I didn't need to play. I like them. I enjoy them. I had a good time. But there's better games. There's so many things out there that I play that are just, they're good, and they will be forgotten to the ravages of time. Focus on the best of the best, but not my best of the best. The best of the best from some sort of aggregate, settled opinion. Don't buy games based off my reviews. Or at least not just based off my reviews. There are many other factors at play. Use as many of them as possible to whittle down to the games that you really feel are actually worth picking up. Because they exist. I guarantee you they exist. But they're far fewer than the number of games you're likely getting your hands on. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, have a good one.